And now we're going to learn about casting, which we saw a little bit before. And the reason why casting exists is because EdgeDB is it's type safe, and so it doesn't let you mix two types together. And because of that, it has convenience, which is casting, which lets you change one type into another if it's a scalar type, and if it can be casted, like if the input is valid. Like for example, you can't cast something like a string called 9 or 90 into an integer because it's invalid input. And then, but you can, for a lot of types, you can cast them using this angle bracket syntax. And then there are also some implicit casts that happen. So there are casts that happen without you needing to ask EdgeDB to do it. And this is an example here. So if you have a select 9 plus 9.9, so this is an integer and this is a float, and they're not the same, but it'll still work for you. And the reason why is because it's simply going to implicitly turn this into a float, and we can prove that. So we can wrap it in brackets here, and then say, ask it, is this a float 64? Which is the default number of bytes for a float, and it says true. So if you have an integer and change it to a float, so the reason why it does it implicitly is because there's no data lost here. Like if you were to cast 9.9 into an integer, then you'd lose this part after the decimal point. But if you were casting, or if you're adding these together, then this result here is going to not lose any of the data. So that's the reason why this works implicitly. And then we can see that this is indeed a float 64, because if you ask it, is it a float 32, it's going to say false. So that is an implicit cast, but sometimes you need to do it yourself, and then it's called an explicit cast. So that you'll see here. So if we're going to add an integer to a string, it's not going to just do it for us. It's going to say, hey, we can't add a string to an integer 64. And this is pretty nice. It has a hint in saying, hey, why don't you use an explicit typecast, or come up with or use a function. There are a lot of functions you can use to convert from one type to another. But this is easy to fix. All we have to do, because 9 is a valid input for an integer 64, we just do this. So there you go. So that's going to work. And yeah, as we saw before, we saw this a few videos ago, so don't need to do this again. But if you take this string and then try to turn it into an integer 64-bit integer, it's just not going to do it. And so casting, when you can do multiple casts, and the way you read them is from right to left. So let's say for some reason, there's actually no reason to do this, but so if you have stir int 32, 50 is stir string. So if you have this is going to say, take the number 50, make it a 32-bit integer, then make it a string, then make it into a 64-bit integer, then make it a string. So all of this stuff at the very end, is it a stir, is it a string? It's going to say true. So you can read it, if you want to read it from left and right, you can say the number 50 into this, into this, into this, into this, or you can read it from left to right, so that you can say, I want you to give me a string from an integer from a string from an integer of value 50. So either way you want to read it, that's the way casting works. And so that works for scalar types. You can't just cast like a city into a person. They're too complex. Maybe like later on in the future there'll be like a way to do that. Who knows? But there's one new thing which happened in EdgeDB 3.0, which was 4 or 5 months ago, which is that you can cast from UUID, which is the type for the ID parameter in objects. So you can cast from that into a type, into an object type. So we can give this a try. So select, let's just, so here are a whole bunch of cities, and let's just pull up one of these UUIDs. How do you copy here? I don't use the UI as much as I use the REPL. Hold on, I'm going to sneak into the REPL for a second. There we go. I have an ID. Okay, so if we're going to cast into a city, we can do this. So you can see this that left to right casting again. So to cast into a UUID, well, this is going to start as a string. So you say cast this into a UUID, and that'll return us just a UUID. And then we know that this is going to be a city. So let's try to do a cast that won't work. We'll try to cast it into a person, and it says, hey, a default person with this ID does not exist. But because we know that this is going to be a city, we can, what is going on? There we go. So we know this is a city. So if we cast from the UUID, it's going to work, and it's going to return us a default city here. And then one other thing, I'm going to pull this open a little bit more. There we are. Let's put it over a second line just for readability. There we go. So we've cast it into a city, and let's say we want to do a name and important places. We'd like to display these two, and then it's going to be a little bit confused because the way it's reading this is we are selecting a string. Sometimes that will happen. So what you can do is you can wrap it inside inside these brackets here, so you can see. So wrap the whole expression inside brackets. So this is going to say select this this object type that is created from this cast, and then take it, and then the shape is going to be the name and the important places, and then that's going to give us the default or the city inside the module default called Munich. So yeah, the way you'd read it is take a string, try to cast it into a UUID, try to cast that into a city, and then take that, wrap it inside these parentheses, and then now that it's a city type, then display name and important places. So that is how casting works.